Hey, a good nerve Shabbos. It's crazy how time flies, but this Shabbos in Shul we'll be blessing the new month of Elul, which is the month that prepares us for the high holidays. And this week's Torah portion will be Parshat Re'eh, the portion of Re'eh which means to see, and God asks us to see the blessing and the curse. But in this week's Torah portion, Jerusalem is mentioned 20 times. Moses keeps on mentioning to the Jewish people that the day will come and God will bring you Lamakom Asher. You will come to the place that God has chosen for you, for Him to dwell, His presence. And He keeps on mentioning the place. But what's interesting is that in all the 20 times that He mentions Jerusalem, He doesn't mention it by name. He says you will come to the place that God will choose to rest His presence there. And we all know that Jerusalem or Zion is mentioned in the scriptures and the prophets 621 times, Jerusalem. And if you count Zion and all the other names, it's mentioned over 800 times. But yet in the actual 5 books of Moses, it is not mentioned even once by its name, Yerushalayim. It's always mentioned and alluded to with other names. And the question is why? Maimonides tells us the basic answer. Maimonides says, first of all, because if it would say the name, and people would realize it took 400 years till King David conquered it, and all the nations would try to come and rush and take it, which we see today happen, right? Jerusalem is the city that's the holiest city for the Jews, yet every other nation claims it and came after and says, oh, it's our holiest city. Jerusalem's not mentioned once in the Quran, but they say it's our holiest city, etc., etc. He also says that if it would name Jerusalem by the name, then all the tribes would fight to have their portion in Israel in that part where Jerusalem is. And of course, according to most commentaries, it wasn't divided amongst any of the tribes. But yet, even with these answers, it still puzzles us why Yerushalayim is not mentioned once in the Bible. And the Maharal of Prague's brother gives a remarkable explanation on this that the Lubavitcher Rebbe expounded on many years ago on the yahrzeit of his dear father on the 20th of this past week. And the Rebbe says like this, expounding on the Maharal's brother's words. You see, for 2,000 years the Jewish people have been in exile, and we haven't been in the holy city of Jerusalem. We haven't been in Israel. Yet wherever we went, we yearned, we prayed to be in the holy city of Jerusalem. In fact, I did a wedding this Sunday, and besides breaking the glass, the Chatan sang, if thy forgets Jerusalem, thy forgets the right hand. It's in the blood. It's in the veins of a Jew. But what God wanted, says the Maharal's brother, is that a Jew should know that Jerusalem is meta-geographical. That yes, there's the city of Jerusalem, but Jerusalem is in the heart of soul of every Jew. Wherever you may be in the world, when a Jew prays towards east, when a Jew closes his eyes and prays towards God, Jerusalem is in his heart. Jerusalem is right there. And that's why the Maharal's brother says, that the Torah says, doesn't say the word explicitly Yerushalayim. It says, Ki makom asher yivchar Hashem l'shaken shmo sham. Because we're the place that God will choose to dwell His presence there. God dwells His presence in the midst, in the heart, in the soul of every single Jew that seeks Him out sincerely, with heart, with love, with joy. What a powerful message. For 2,000 years we weren't able to be in Jerusalem. And yet, Jerusalem was always in our heart, wherever the Jew was. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. We celebrated, we sang, we pleaded, we asked. Even after we were brought back to Jerusalem, in the 1948 war, we lost the old city and weren't able to go to the Kotel until 1967. My father tells me he remembers going to the Kotel for those few years when the Jews were allowed to, but then we were forbidden. That's the story of the Jewish people. Grini and I are so honored and blessed that this coming week we will be going after Shabbat on Thursday to the holy city of Yerushalayim, where we will spend 10 days together with our family, basking in the holiness of Yerushalayim. But wherever we are in the world, we know that Yerushalayim is with us. You know, on Tisha B'Av this year, David Dugo Leitner, a Holocaust survivor, passed away. Who was David Dugo Leitner? David Dugo Leitner was born in Hungary in 1930. In 1944, the Nazis came into Hungary and they sent all the Jews to the ghetto. And then afterwards, they sent them all to Auschwitz. David Dugo Leitner was only 14 years old, and his family were in Auschwitz where they split them off. His mother and his sisters were sent straight to the gas chambers where they perished. And him and his brother survived. They ended up in Birkenau, where the Nazis on January 18 took the infamous death march, where they sent 4,000 children, young kids, to their death in the freezing cold of winter, when the Soviets were coming in to Auschwitz in the Birkenau. And he says he remembers on that death march, he had a ripped shirt and ripped pants that didn't even go down to his shoes, and holes in his shoes. And yet, he was emaciated, he was tiny, and he had to go on this death march. And if you stepped out of line, the Nazis killed you. And here was this little 14-year-old, and what did he do? He said he closed his eyes, and he remembered back to his home in Hungary. His mother would make these amazing bilkalach. Bilkalach is the Hebrew word for challah rolls. She would make little challah rolls for the kids to have. And he says the house would smell delicious. And he would come into the house and he would ask his mother for a challah bilkal. And she would say, David, Dugo, who was nicknamed, you can't have, it's for Shabbos. But one day when you come to the city of Jerusalem, in the city of Jerusalem, the bilkalach grow on the trees. That's the greatest city in the world. Over there you'll have it. And that's what she always told him. And then he was on the death march and he closed his eyes, and that's what he dreamt about. That's what gave him survival. He dreamt about his mother's challah bilkalach and maybe one day having it in Jerusalem. He survived the camps. He survived the death march miraculously. He was liberated by the Soviets, and in 1949, at the age of 18, he came to Jerusalem. And he went to Shuk Machane Yehuda, and he saw them making the falafel balls out of chickpeas with cumin. And for some reason, it reminded him of his mother's bilkalach, although it didn't taste anything like them. And he had one, and he had two, and he had three, and it reminded him of his mother. And then he made a tradition. Every year on January 18th, the day the death march started, he would go and have falafel balls for his lunch, and he would eat as many as he could. But he would do it alone, and his children and grandchildren say he married this woman Sarah, and he had children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and he always did it alone. But then in 2016, one of his grandchildren or great-grandchildren said, Grandpa, could we go with you? And he relented. And she posted a picture on social media of her and her grandfather having the falafel balls, and the reason that he had it. And it went viral. And all over Israel, they called it Dugo Day, after David Dugo Leitner. And people all over, hospitals, municipalities, started serving falafels in that day, because David Dugo said that he wanted to make sure that he never went hungry again and no Jew should ever starve again. And it went so viral that in 2019, President Reuven Rivlin invited David Dugo and his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren, all of them, to the Beit HaNasi, to the house of the president, to have falafels with him. And then President Herzog was also invited him. And this tradition has become even greater, where in embassies in Warsaw and in London, they started serving falafels on Dugo Day on January 18th. That's the story of a man who, wherever he was, even traveling on the death march in Auschwitz to Mauthausen, he was dreaming. His eyes were closed and he was dreaming about Jerusalem. But then he got to physically be there. And that's the story of survival. This man who died on Tisha B'Av. And in fact, people said the first meal after Tisha B'Av, they were going to have falafels in memory of David Dugo. My friends, we might live in Boston, we might live in Paris, we might live in New York or Miami or Beijing, but wherever we are, in our hearts, if we connect to God, if we connect to Yerushalayim, we could be there. Lucky Gurney and I to go spend 10 days there, and all of us that are able to touch those holy stones and to visit the city. but know it where you are, that the city is also in your heart. Have a good Shabbos.